Up. Hey everybody. Hopefully you're here. I just got a crazy look. So I'm in a lounge today at School of Education at Penn, and so like people are giving me like those crazy looks right now. But don't worry, we're here. I'm DJ Eddie Innovate, educator innovator. I just stole that name from the last session. I'm gonna just keep it. And we are back at the Make With Me live session for the CL MOOC, week 2. And this week we are with the University of Illinois Writing Project. We have a lot of fun activities to get into. And so I'm just going to go ahead and pass it off. Scott, you can take it from here.
All right, great. So welcome everybody, and thank you for taking the time to join us tonight. We are about 4 strong here. We hope to be about 8 strong in the next few minutes, so plan on some additional folks joining us. The way we wanted to kind of structure tonight was to start with a quick round of introductions where we say who we are and the kind of work we do, and share the thing that we're currently making that will provide the context for our discussion tonight. After that, then we'll start another round of discussion thinking about what's currently on our mind because of that make that we're engaged in. So I'll start. I'm Scott Filkins. I teach English at Central High School in Champaign, Illinois. I also co-direct the University of Illinois Writing Project, where we are in the final few days of our Summer Institute and having a lot of fun doing the things you always do at a Summer Institute, but we've also specifically focused on remediation as part of our work with our group. So we hope to have 2 of our current SI participants joining soon, so they'll be able to bring the perspective from that angle. What I'm making this week, I shared on the CL MOOC Facebook page last night. It's there behind me. I'm not sure how clearly you can see it. I'm doing a lot of thinking about what it means to be a college-level writer. So I've taken some stuff that I've written and tried to put it into images to see if that helps me make sense of things any better. So, Suzanne, you want to go next? You're to my left on the screen.
Sure, thanks, Scott.
Yeah.
My name is Suzanne Linder. I am a former high school English teacher. I taught for 17 years at the University of Illinois Laboratory High School. And currently I am an administrator in a prison education program called the Education Justice Project. We teach for credit classes at Danville Penitentiary, and I'm about 6 weeks into that job. I just last week got clearance to go into the prison. And I also do instructional planning with the Fab Lab, which is a makerspace on campus that does a lot of camps with kids. What am I working on this week? I mean, I was joking before we started broadcasting that really what I'm remediating is my identity after being a teacher for 17 years and now being an administrator and in a completely different context from a high school. I really am working on trying to figure out what are the pieces of my identity that fit and what are the pieces of my identity that are new and need to evolve. I posted my intro last night, which was actually a reflection on the Making with Objects that I did with the UIWP SI last week, and I was sort of thinking today about how that is in itself a remediation, because I had to take what was an object that you looked at visual and try to describe it in words, and I'm going to see if I can magically, I've never shared my screen, I'm going to see if I can show you that just real quickly. Yeah, ooh. So does this mean people can see?
Yep, we see it.
All right. So this is on my blog, and I'll put the URL in the chat. But that I think is what I'm thinking about in terms of remediation. So do I get a pick? Do I get a pick on who goes next?
Sorry, I thought I was unmuted, but I wasn't. I was going to welcome Wendy to the group. Hi, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your local context and what you're working on this week?
Eddie
All right,
has
got the unmute. I've got the unmute button. That's good. Yep. Hi everyone, I'm Wendy and I'm from Central Australia. What I'm working on this week is unpacking some of the poetry that I've written. So I've recently had an exhibition of writing poetry for somebody who did surrealism photos. And through that exercise, it was about 12 poems that were done in very quick succession. But what I'm going to do this week is take one of those poems and change it around, do it in different formats. And I'm also hoping to hook up with some of the people that I've met in this forum. Some of my ideas at this stage is to invite somebody to play some music to the poem, and also to paint a background, so that I'll end up with a iMovie sort of thing, but with a collaboration of different ideas around the same poem.
Awesome, great. We're really glad that you could be here, Wendy, and we'll come back to that project and ask you what you're currently thinking about remediation with it, okay? Great.
Sure,
Ryan,
no worries.
Great. Ryan, do you want to go next, and then we'll head to Maureen after that?
I'd be happy to. So my name is Ryan Kerr, and I teach English at a high school called Rantoul Township High School, just north of Champaign-Urbana. And I've been there for 3 years. Previously, I was in Austin, Texas, and before that, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So I've traveled the center part of the country, north and south. I'm also a doctoral student at the University of Illinois in curriculum and instruction, working on issues of language and literacy and stuff like that. So that's my backstory. I'm also working with the University of Illinois Writers Project this summer. And I like to use the Writers Project as an opportunity to take a break from my graduate work and also from my work. So tonight I'm trying to have a little bit more fun. I'm trying not to concentrate on anything too heady. So I went to my classroom this week, and I pulled out, you guys have probably all seen magnetic poetry before. So I pulled out some magnetic poems, and then on my way home today I stopped and I grabbed a Rubik's Cube, and I think I'm going to try to put these things together to create some kind of random poetry generator. So that's what I'm going to be working on tonight. I'm going to have a sort of a Rubik's Cube poem machine by the end of the night. That's my plan. That's what I'm going to be working on. So I'm not working on anything too deep, unless at the end of this make we get to the true nature of how arbitrary poetry actually is. I don't know. I hope that's not the conclusion that we arrive at. But so that's what I'm going to be working on tonight, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So Maureen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right, can everyone hear me? Awesome. My name is Maureen Bronfman. I am an ESL teacher for K through 5. I have also taught bilingual 4th grade, and this is my first year doing the writing program, and my first time, I guess, consciously remediating and thinking of it that way. And something that I have really found that I enjoy doing is remediating images. I really love taking an image, whether it's one that I've created or one that someone else has created, and turning it into a text. And so something that I started working on this week was taking one of my favorite paintings by Jackson Pollock and remediating it into a poem. So that's what I will be working on.
Great. Thank you. I'm glad you're able to be here. Katrina and Carla, are you both there?
Yes, we are. Yeah.
All right. Who are you and what are you working on?
So my name is Katrina Kennett, and I'm a doctoral student at the U of I, also with Ryan in language and literacy and stuff. I used to teach high school English out in Massachusetts, and what I'm going to be working on tonight is playing with, I'm doing a sewing project right now, and I'm thinking a lot about how my sewing process maps onto my writing process. I think there's some really interesting, dynamic there that I can't quite articulate yet. So that is part of me playing and making and thinking about tools and materials and what are the connections. So that's what I'm puttering with.
And I'm Carla Schroeder, and I teach kindergarten in Urbana. And tonight I'm making jewelry, like I like to do sometimes, but I'm remaking an old antique glass lamp into some memory jewelry for a friend whose family owned the lamp. So, yeah.
All right, great. So we've introduced everybody, right? Nobody's joined and I've missed it? Nope. Okay, great. So let's continue the conversation by returning to our current project and sharing a bit about what it's making us think in terms of what remediation is and how it's going for us. I mentioned that I'm taking text and putting it into images. The specific text that I'm working with is like a 40-page, I mean, it's a literature review, so it's long and dense and kind of boring. So I tried to be kind of playful with my images. And one of the things I realized right away is how tricky it is to give images to words that we use every day and don't think that much about, like high school. How do you represent a high school? And college, how do you represent a college? So I ended up relying on some really kind of weird, I don't know, like folk symbols. Like I used red buildings with a flag out front to represent high school, just because that's what school looks like compared to college, which I ended up drawing something that looked kind of like a Parthenon because I had to make it look fancy, which reveals a lot about the way we think about those two sets of institutions. And I started thinking even more about how a single image can't get at the complexity of the thing that we're talking about. So just like there's no such thing as a single high school experience or such thing as a single college experience, the symbols that I was using were really lacking. That said, oversimplifying all those symbols allowed me to put a ton of content on a single page, so I can try to think about everything at once in a way that text doesn't really allow me to do. So I've had a lot of fun getting away with maybe kind of lazy symbolism in the service of seeing a big picture, really quickly. And great, our two art teachers are with us. So I'm going to stop blathering a second and let Rusty first introduce himself and share a bit about what he's making this week, and then we'll have Lisa share what she's working on as well. Rusty, you cool to jump in?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Rusty Clevenger. I teach in Urbana at Prairie and Wiley Elementary, and I teach K through 5th visual arts. Our district also has Arts Infusion, which is by fusing regular classroom curriculum with the arts in a way of teaching it differently. And Carla asked me to come. So this week I'm working at Splash at Wiley, so I don't really know what you guys have been doing all week. So
that's cool. Is there any certain project that's either current or maybe recent where you've taken something and moved from one medium to another? And just briefly introduce that.
So last week I did teach at Parkland College for Kids, and we did movie making. So it's the concept of kids storyboarding their own story and then actually using different camera angles to tell the story. So it's kind of a narrative. And then the other one is, I guess, during Splash, I have students making a mural for the Harlem Renaissance. So we study the time period, history, and then they sketched it out and are now painting it. So.
Okay, great. And in a few minutes, we'll go around again and have everybody share maybe what they've learned or thought about remediation because of that project. All right. Lisa, are you able to join on the chat? Can you use your mic?
I see that she is muted. Hopefully.
Oh, okay. Can you unmute?
Oh, she's off. Here she is.
Oh.
Okay. There we go.
You can hear me? It has the cross through it.
We can hear you. Yeah,
Okay.
The cross will be there. If it's not red, you're cool.
Okay. Well, I'm Lisa Evans, and I'm sorry to have joined you late. I had a little technical difficulty. When I talked with Scott yesterday, I mentioned a project where I think I did remediation. This is a new term for me in this context. Basically, I was working with a pre-existing ceramic bust of Hindenburg, and I made a mold of it and then slip cast it along with other molds that I was using, cartoon characters like Topo Gigio and other things, and I combined them all together to make a ceramic sculpture. So that's what I have to put out there, and sorry again that I'm a little late and not really knowing what's going on quite yet.
You don't need to apologize, and none of us know any more than you do, so we're all good, okay?
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Do you see that we've got a couple questions in the chat roll, and that they really have to do with, like, what is remediation, and how is it similar and different to remixing? That might be a good one for someone to address.
Yeah, does somebody want to take the remix versus remediation question from their perspective?
Well, I guess I could talk about it a little bit. You know, I'm kind of still, in a certain sense, wrapping my head around it a little bit. I can say some of the things that we did at our writers project is we are now, as Scott said, in the third and final week of our site project. So we're getting ready to wrap things up. But we spent the first 2 weeks knowing that we were going to be doing this week on remediation, kind of as a group. Coming to terms with it and sort of figuring it out and working with it. And at times it's been a little cumbersome because I don't know that there's necessarily a particularly easy answer to that question. I'll talk about where I have come in that sense. The first thing that we did on the first day of our writing project was take a picture and turn it into text. And that was sort of the direction, right? There were no more parameters put on than that. And I think in that sense we were able to sort of run with that in whatever way we were able to interpret it. So I kind of did a little bit of ekphrasis. You know, I used the picture that I brought in to act as an influence to influence a piece of poetry. But throughout the week we sort of did, I think, although the artifacts themselves may have been a little bit more abstract, the concept was a little bit more concrete. So we did an activity called Making with Things, which is one of the things that Suzanne had posted on her blog. Sort of taking specific forms of media and moving them, turning them into new artifacts that were purposeful. And that's to say that they didn't necessarily have to serve a function, but they were made intentionally, so that we wound up with, and in fact, in a second, as soon as I'm done talking, I can share the blog that we've been keeping for our writers project if anybody wants to go and take a look at some of the results. But I guess the way that we've been thinking about it throughout the last couple of weeks is, how does your message change when you move from one medium to another? What affordances and what kind of constraints do you have when you move from one medium to another? So what can you do with a painting that you can't do with a argumentative essay, and vice versa? And what what sort of problems arise, what dilemmas arise, what is easier to do in one form over another. So those are some of the things that have occurred to me. I don't know if there's sort of a better or clearer, I imagine there's a clearer way of explaining some of these things, but that's kind of where I've come from my perspective.
I'd like to follow on there. One of the questions that came up in the Twitter feed in the last couple of days was, does the change in media change the message of the original piece? And one of the activities that I did recently in a previous MOOC was I got a bunch of words and put it through this bit of free software, and it changed it into music. And so one of the words that I've been thinking of is this, which is transposition. And the thing about transposition in a musical sense is that you have a piece written in a key and then you change it to a different key. And so the message is still the same in that case. But the other word that I've been thinking of is this one, which is improvisation. And I think with improvisation, what you do is you have the original work, but then you change the message a bit. And you still keep sort of the basic message, but you add things into it. So with the work that I'm thinking about is that I have a basic poem, but I would like to improvise on that. And so I'd like to have it interpreted and improvised by somebody painting when they're thinking about the poem, or somebody playing a piece of music when they're thinking about the poem, or even putting the words into musical notation. So I think you've got two perspectives. Improvisation can definitely change the message, but it still has the foundation of the original work. And then I think transposition can sort of slightly change it. So people are talking, somebody said in the chat about using the same, remixing is a term that's used for using the same media. So you get a photo, or you get 3 photos and you put it together, and then you've got a remix. Or you get 3 poems and you add to it, and that might be a remix. So that's staying in the same media. But then I think you can transpose that into a slightly different media, and that's another way of showing that message.
Suzanne, do you want to add?
I just no. I'm feeling old in the face of new technology. There's a fascinating conversation going on the chat roll. People who are listening to us talk, and they're really good questions. And I can't figure out how to get it on the same window as my Google Hangout. I feel like I need to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What I felt from the last Hangout,
screen, because we've got conversations in 2 different media here, and.
Yeah,
I would really like to respond to the chat session a bit more and to include people. It might take a little bit of time, like there might be a little bit of gap, but I think if people on the Hangout can actually respond directly to some of the chats as we go along, it would help the flow.
So I guess if you're watching the chat and you want to answer a question, especially in relation to the work that you're currently doing, that might be a way to kind of blend the original plan of talking about our making with the ideas and questions from the chat.
So I'd just like to kick it off by responding to Stephanie Loomis. Stephanie Loomis says, love the musical connection. And if Stephanie Loomis could perhaps expand on that and say which part of the musical connection that you were thinking about. Thanks. Stephanie's just saying that they have 4 windows open. So they're trying to massage the technology to allow them to respond. And I think that's part of the challenge of having the back chat channel. But I think it's also an important part of this Hangout.
Yes, I'm loving the M. Weller 77. Michael Weller just posted into the chat roll that the chat roll is remediating the Hangout, and I think it's awesome. I'm trying to combine some of the opinions and try to get those flowing, so we have more of this flow. So I'm on it as well. Thanks, Wendy, for the help with this.
So early on in the chat roll, Pedestrian Poet had a question about moving from images to words or words to images being fairly easy, but moving between other mediums being a lot more challenging. And she was curious if other people have experienced that same challenge, or maybe what other mediums people had moved between that weren't words and pictures.
I would answer from my perspective, which isn't necessarily informed by that much. The easier or harder question is less about the medium and more about whether I'm trying to remediate with a lot of integrity in terms of the representation staying, like how much of the message am I trying to keep versus how much am I trying to use the original piece as kind of an inspiration for the next medium. The project I did this morning where I tried to take an image and change it into words, I tried to keep the shape really close. So in that regard, it was kind of easy because I was trying to be really quite literal. So I guess that from my point of view, it depends on the degree to which you're trying to literally represent what was happening in one medium as opposed to doing something more like what Wendy mentioned with improvisation. So how free do you want to be in the movement?
I'm wondering, with this remediation term, it sounds like we're not talking about something where the meaning has radically changed, or can it change? I mean, I think part of the exciting thing about using an inspiration source is then changing it into something that comments maybe on the original source, or satirically alters it. So I don't know how this fits into your definition of remediation, if that's just a subset of it, or if that's what it's about.
I definitely think it is and can be about that. I wonder if it's related to whether you're remediating something you created or whether you're remediating something someone else created and using it as an inspiration piece. Like the thing I'm working on, I'm purposely trying to keep the message kind of the same because I'm just trying to see what happens when I move from one to the other and will anything new come out. But if I were working on something where I was trying to like comment satirically on something, yeah, totally, that makes sense as well.
Can I
just wanted to...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Just one from the chat. Terry mentions about coding. Do we remediate with coding? For example, Mozilla's thimble or X-ray goggles. So does anybody have any thoughts about that? Coding's a bit out of my... I don't code at the moment, but I'm certainly interested in that goggle perspective and whether that's remediation.
Yeah, and also Anna Smith added sort of like is meaning ever fixed in that way, or is it always changing? Is it always fluid? And we think about coding, and we think about web pages and the Mozilla tools. I don't know if you all are familiar. They allow you to sort of edit web pages and change symbols. Thimble allows you to sort of see the code behind pages that you may remix it and change. So when we talk about like meaning and how we're always changing meanings and context, just throwing that into the mix.
I would say too that playing in different media has helped me make the meaning itself. Like I had, in the sense that one of this sewing and composing process was initiated by I needed to make a video for a class. So I was like, oh, okay, I have this sewing project. I'll go ahead and use video. It's called writing with video. So I'm sure, in a way, I was pretty much set up to play with this frame. But in doing all of this work with trying to figure out how to use video in order to capture the sense of sewing too. Like there's a meaning there for sewing, and then I was like, I want to use video, but I have to use video here. So how am I going to understand it? And it was only after I was making and making and making within the video that I realized what I was doing was my writing process too, or my making process, I guess broadly. So those are two ways in which I compose. So when I'm thinking about meaning, I'm thinking about it as it's an in, right? I have this meaning and I want to do it in this medium, but I'm also thinking about it how it emerges through playing with the media that we use.
So there's a comment in the chat there that says it would be great to talk about how meaning felt more fluid with objects than print text. Can you hold up what you're creating? Something that you're creating there?
Are you asking me? That comment was directed at me.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, I was talking about this trying to write up and describe this object that I had made, and so we really spent 90 minutes making this object, and then the members of the UIWP Summer Institute read the object. So we did this speed dating reading where they spent 90 seconds looking at the object and giving feedback, and I took notes on it, and then I was trying to write that up last night and realized, I mean, unless I wrote like a 10-page, like overly detailed narration of what I meant to do, what people read, and what that made me think about, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be so verbose. I liked the efficiency and the clarity of the image, and that it could mean so many things in such a small space, and I found myself wanting to use that small number of words, to use that kind of concision, and that composition process was so much more challenging with words than with objects, which I'm an English teacher. Normally I would think that it's easier for me to express myself with words, but to express myself sort of concisely and maybe with some ambiguity that I wanted in the image was much, much harder to do in the words when I sort of remediated that object from my introduction.
Well, and to tag on to that a little bit, for me, it's the comfort level of the medium. So you're talking about you're fairly comfortable with words, but using the items to make with things was really a fluid process for you, and then there's a little bit of a hang-up in trying to translate that into words, to text. For me, it's sometimes trying to take the things or the words and translate them into something else that I'm not comfortable using. And so then I find that I'm stumbling over, okay, this is the medium I'm trying to express it in, but I don't feel like I'm getting the thought across.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the learning curve in using that technology, and then I don't want to share it because I'm worried that other people will unfairly judge the effort put forth in it when, I'm just learning, I have training wheels on, I'll get the hang of it next time. And so I find I'm more willing to compose, create, remediate things in familiar formats, and when it's unfamiliar, then it becomes stressful or chaotic, and the creativity drops on it for me.
But for me, there's also such a distinction between, writing and words are my professional life, and images and making are my private life, or my not, those are the things that I do in my free time. And so the audience and the expectations that I hold myself to in those contexts are really different. And so part of what I was working on made me look at that in a really interesting way. I actually think more people saw the object I made because no one reads my blog, but I was much more nervous about writing it up on my blog in that sort of written form where I feel like I'm evaluated as a professional, whereas the object I was just making. I was just making a diorama, and it was fun, and I was gluing shit together, and that was awesome. And that's really different. Sorry, Ryan. Little baby ears. That was different than writing.
I definitely have experienced the same thing, only in reverse. I'm very serious about my object making, not so serious about my writing, and I think sometimes it's fun to take on something that's out of your comfort zone and just don't feel like you have to be good at it and just play with it.
Right, it's much more playful. For me, the object making was much more playful than the writing.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa and I used to teach at the same high school. She taught art, so it's fun to see her.
Maureen, you mentioned in our chat internally something about the difficulty of moving from image to word. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure. I think, similar to what other people have said, I'm much more comfortable with words, and images communicate to me in a way that I guess maybe I'm not as much of a tactile learner. That's not kind of my style, and so needing to, the activity we did where we just had objects and we had to create something is just very out of my comfort zone. And so it was almost like there was a disconnect between anything I would maybe intend to create and actually making it. I just couldn't quite connect that way in my brain, whereas if I see an image, I immediately, it evokes words and emotions and things, and I can verbalize that, but it's hard for me to figure out how to verbalize something physically with objects. And I think it was also interesting, the way we did it, we had objects, we brought in some, but then the way we ended up, we had some things that we had brought in, some things that other people had brought in, things we were given. And one of the things that I find so interesting about remediating is that there's that blend of maybe our intended message as well as the original intended messages, and then when people were giving us feedback, they were bringing their own ideas as far as what they came in with, their background, their biases, their thoughts, all of that, and so the end result was so different than anything I could have ever intended it to be, and I think that was something that it really took me out of my comfort zone, but in a very good way. But it was very different than any experience I had had remediating.
Do you guys think that as writers, when you play with imagery, then is it building your writing skills, or is it just opening you up to being more creative, or what does it do for you? Because I would like to, have people who are more verbally, that's generally the kids in my class are more verbally astute, I think, than visually astute. So just curious what it feels like for you.
I think that's a great question, and I guess a lot of my experience as I've been remediating has had a lot to do with how I'm making meaning. And though you might be surprised to hear it, articulating that meaning making, but in a certain sense, it's been kind of like, well, what have I done, and what kind of process have I gone through, and what was the experience that I actually just had, and does it have meaning, and is it worth my time to consider it? And I have come out on the other side of saying yes, it has been worth it. But for me, it's a great question, thinking about, I'm not scrutinizing over, am I choosing the right word or the right syntax? For me, it's been a lot more about, is this an experience that is illuminating my understanding of objects or of media or of what I'm trying to say. And oftentimes, for me at least, it's been in a much more abstract way. But I don't know, maybe other people have had different kinds of experiences with that. I think that's a great question.
Lisa, it's a good question, and I'm thinking about it, and part of what I'm thinking about is that the kind of academic and descriptive writing that I do about teaching doesn't include a lot of imagery. It includes stories, but I don't spend a lot of time using imagery like it would be used in fiction or in poetry. So I actually don't feel like I'm a writer who uses a lot of imagery.
You're talking about imagery in words? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been enjoying the ad hoc voices as a way of remixing pictures that we might see, or just every day where we are. So we're sort of, by recording where we are and recording what we're doing, recording who we're with, it's actually sort of like remixing your environment. Because when you, I'm sure everybody listens to their recording either before or after they post it to the wide world, and then you get an external perspective on what you were doing at that time. So I'm looking forward to adding definitely some audio into this week.
And I've been listening to the conversation, and now I'm sort of like coming out of facilitator and thinking about what's been lighting up for me. And I think it's really what's really been hitting me with remediating, something I've been focused on today, is the stories in themselves have a lives of their own, right? Whether they're truth or whether they're lies. Specifically when we think about how we go about remediating the tale that is American history, and all the myths and truths and erasures and things that we leave out of that story. How do we go about those sort of like collective stories, more than we trying to like remediate the meanings that we have individually? But when we talk about those collective stories, how do we begin to change and retell that meaning, what these words mean and what these images mean?
If we think about remediation in that way, then there's also a lot of power in the hands of the person who's doing the remediation and telling the story, in terms of what they're choosing to include in their version of history.
But not to get too philosophical, I mean, that's an awesome point, but like that's the nature of the power of text, and the power of writing, and the power of historical narrative. And it's interesting because I think a lot of us have been thinking about the ways that we are rewriting those narratives that have been in place for a long time, and sort of taking them in new directions, and sort of telling those counter narratives and the stories that haven't been being told. So in a sense, I just sort of peripherally caught the point that Chris was making. but if I'm hearing it right, that you know, how have stories been almost misinterpreted through remediation historically? But I guess I would look at it more in terms of how can we now start to remediate the you know, the hegemonic narrative, not to get too, but you know, how can we use our power to remediate that story, that is a current story that is often incorrect, right? And how can we start to use these new tools to retell the right story? You know what I mean?
So, do you guys call remediation when you retell a story from a different perspective? Is that remediation? Or is remediation really moving to a new media?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking about. I like the version that's got RE-media. It's re-media.
So
I like that version.
Well, does that means like using the same media? Is that what you're saying? No.
No, I'm saying it's a
new
using
media.
different media. So new media. There's actually a book by Paul Levinson that talks about new media. And new media means that you're the author and you get it out there and share it by using the media. So what we're doing here, we're creating a live hangout, and that in a way is new media. So you could use this new media to interpret other media, and that's why I had a question for Katrina and crew, whether they could show us, you know, what they're creating, because they're actually creating physically, but they're also including it in this new media, because all of a sudden it's something that's available for people to watch later.
Yeah, I think Wendy's comment gets at the complication over these terms, in the sense that there is quite a bit of overlap, where maybe Chris's point was more about if we're using remix as the term for how to take different bits and pieces from the same medium and put them together, there's an element of that. But because there are all these new media channels where those remix stories can get out, and they might involve multiple media in their presentation, there's a place, yeah, perfect, juxtaposition and blending, there's a place where all this overlaps. But I think for the purposes of the work we're doing here, we're really trying to think about what a medium is and what happens when you move from one medium to another with a message.
Well, with art and arts infusion, what we do at Wiley is we have this 5th grade project, and our 2 main questions for the 5th graders all year long is, what is art and who am I? Because those two tend to run parallel lines. And so we use this thing called VTS, which is visual thinking skills. So it's observing a movement piece or a music piece or an art piece, and then always giving them a moment of reflection for them to write down what they thought was happening or what they saw or what was going on. And what's interesting about that is for everybody the perspective's different and the story's different. Which then goes into the aspect as teachers, we then have to provide resources that are variant or provide different viewpoints. But for me personally, when I think of art, I would say that it's kind of really open. I guess I'm starting to lose thought. So when you're creating something, you may totally want one item, and you may want this one point across, but then when a student critiques it, then they may go all over the place, and it's almost more enjoying to listen to that because you get this different viewpoints from several different people. And to me, in that point of remixing, when I think of remixing, I more think of like drag, and how they take cultural items, re-articulate a personal story or personal performance, maybe political, in a way that kind of.
Sorry, Rusty, we're kind of going in and out. We're losing you. Does anybody pick up? I was kind of caught in on the last tell of it. Does anybody can finish his idea, remediate his idea, remix his idea? Well, I I don't. Sorry, Rusty, but I wanted to because I'm seeing two words that are trans like transmediate, right? Is also a rising term, and I'm trying to think of. I've been struggling to figure out what is there a difference between remediate and transmediate? Does it imply two different things? Is different process, different meanings? Just something I'm throwing into the group, and hopefully, Rusty, we can get you back to kind of finish your thought. All right, we'll figure it out, Rusty.
So just a comment from the chat, it says remediation is not a new term, and that it was around before remixing or translation. So it's interesting to use it in this forum, but I think people will certainly get a more rounded idea of what you can do this week.
I think too, to come back to Wendy's question and link it to what we're saying here, is that when I think about remediation, and I don't know much about transmediation or the nuances of that word, if you will, but I'm thinking about how I pay attention to what I can, what's more possible and what's more difficult when I'm paying more attention to the media. I don't know itself. And then Wendy, you'd asked about the going online and offline, and what is what is it potentially this relationship between, I would read it as like material in front of me, and like what then do I make digital? Is it kind of an interesting question for me? Is saying like, where in my process do I take a picture? And like when I take pictures of the sketches I make, and sometimes I take pictures of like the things that I'm making, but rarely do I write down a comment that somebody says to me. Rarely do I take a sound bite of something that I'm thinking about. So too, like in this process work, what I do helps me think about why I'm doing it as well, and the media that I'm working with in order to do it. I want to take a picture of that sketch because I'm able to come back to it later and see if it actually evolved the way I thought. I'll send a picture of a sketch to Suzanne and be like, can I do this on a soft circuit? Would this even work? And like I'm using that media in a very particular way. So that there's a whole lot there that it helps act in a way like my interaction with whatever medium I'm working with helps me reflect on my purposes and what am I trying to do, and from there. So that is how I'm thinking about why, like, my processes of remediation, and why I think it's important for me to keep thinking about it even if I'm not particularly articulate about it.
I'm thinking about an artist, and unfortunately I can't remember their name, but I believe they're British, but they take patterns from, I don't know, 16th century ball gown type dresses and reconstruct those dresses using cloth that is printed with African patterns, and I guess I'm thinking that's kind of an interesting artistic example of remediation. I don't really love this word remediation, I have to tell you, because I keep getting confused with remediation, like, you're behind and we have to catch you up. I wish there was a different word. But I was just thinking about examples.
That's a lovely. Yeah, that's a lovely example. I've just got another quick example which is similar in that somebody in this town has recorded all the sounds out of a coffee machine, and he's made a recording that he's going to put onto 12-inch vinyl, and it's purely all the sounds out of a coffee machine. And I go, yeah, I'm there.
Yeah, Lisa, I think there is something about remediation that hangs people up in a way that, so last year in the CL MOOC we used Remix quite a bit, and I didn't experience any of the same dissonance with the term, or transposition is a term I used to use with my students. So you take something from one medium and transpose it, which is one of the terms Wendy used when she was talking about music. So, I mean, it's probably worth looking at what's the like sand in the shoe about the term remediation. But it does seem to bug people more than some other terms. Ryan, I know you guys have been grappling with it all for 3 weeks now.
Yeah, and I think you bring up some fair points, and I mean, this is the nature of, academic too, and I do think it's worth, some of the static that was out there in the CL MOOC-verse had to do with, is this just another term? Is this just somebody trying to stake a claim on an area of academia, or is there a real thing behind it? But I also think that a lot of times these issues are kind of complicated, and we figure it out by working through it and by having these kinds of experiences and asking these kinds of questions and having these kinds of conversations, right? If there aren't any other final points, I'd like to maybe go back through people who have been making tonight and sort of check in on their progress, and also ask the question of where we maybe see what we've been doing tonight making its way into the classroom. And I guess I'll start. I have not made it very far. I have to say that. Well, first of all, so I love magnetic poetry. I love kind of having a sort of bank to draw from when I'm working with poetry. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think some people sort of look at this as like, oh, that's like amateurish, but I think it's great words in here and they fit together really well. I also didn't want to lose them, because if I actually like adhered them to my Rubik's Cube, then what would my students have to make dirty poems with on my magnetic walls? So I had to add an extra step of printing out my poems after they were written. So I can show you, see if I can bring one up here. And if somebody has like a sexier way of getting these words onto the Rubik's Cube, let me know, because right now they're just printed on paper and taped up. But I will I'll post the full thing when it's done, but presumably when it's all
unsexy is good.
Yeah. Unsexy Rubik's poetry. That's what my collection will be called. Presumably you can just turn it, and now I've got a new poem. So that's how it's going to work. So so I don't know. How am I going to bring this into the classroom? I mean, I think it's a fun activity that's, gets you to think about. I don't know if there's a book that I really like called The Poet's Companion by Kim Adanasio and somebody else. Dorian Lau, I think is her name. And they have this great chapter on sort of like the poetry of the ephemeral, or poetry of the things that you can't really. I mean, poetry should be in some sense abstract, and I think that this is sort of a really great thing. Much like this, some of the terms we've been talking about in our conversation. Sometimes it's kind of hard to pin down, but that doesn't make it not awesome and not beautiful. So maybe that's where a conversation like this could go. And I think poetry is one of those things that gets to bleed into a lot of different realms. And sort of channels different parts of our creative process that we don't always get to or aren't always asked to. So maybe I'll have my kids make Rubik's poems this year. That might be fun. I don't know. So that's me. Who else has been making today and wants to talk about it? Katrina or Carla, are you guys available in there?
Okay. All right. Can you see? Trying to hold it up.
Oh, nice.
So I often have to take a photograph after Katrina was talking about taking photos, but I do it for a couple reasons. I do it to see how it hangs on the neck, how it catches the light, whether it buckles in a certain spot, or whether it hits on the collarbone funny, or what the beads feel like on the skin. And then I might even send it to a friend to ask if it's not a custom piece for somebody. Like, would you wear this? Is it too odd? Whatever. So sometimes I just make for me, and I enjoy making it, and that's cool. But when I was trying to sell it, like as a little side business, I found that I had to take the idea of what I wanted and sketch it out before I lost it, and then go shop for the materials, and then make the piece. And then in order to list it somewhere, I had to list what the materials were, and then I had to do like the sales pitch. So it felt like I was kind of remediating the piece a couple different times, depending on whether I was advertising it, or whether I was shopping for it, or whether I was making it. Mm-hmm. Which is an interesting thing that I never even considered until Katrina started talking about her processes and making things. I'm like, no, I just sit down, I put things together, it's a really good time. So that's my 2 cents.
So I successfully did. I only did a little tonight. I pinned the edge of the bag, so it in theory, it'll now like sit like a bag, and it'll have. What I'm struggling with right now is the bottom. The bottom is going to be. I'm trying to figure out if it's going to be flat or if it'll have this weird like, crease in it. So I need to kind of play with one of these, like a fold. Let me see if I can hold it up better. So currently, it has a weird crease in it. But in theory, bottoms of bags should be flat. So I got to figure out if I want to play with that. But it took me a while to get going. I couldn't find the end for a little while. Like I was like, I know I cut this. Like I cut this. Like it's around. Like I moved it earlier. And so I was kind of puttering and coming in and out and like, where's this? This is the time I need the end. This is the moment. The only piece I need to do is this. And so it kind of helped me think about paces of getting going. And sometimes I'm like, all right, everybody, we're about to write about this right now. Go. And like sometimes about pacing of like, well, do you need a little puttering time? Do you need to get going a little bit? Is there something else I can just hand you? Like, could you be doing something else instead? So one, I was thinking about kind of getting going, and then I was thinking about just looking at it from all of these different angles. I feel like if anybody was watching me today, it was just a lot of like, And I wonder too about, especially when writing, how often I don't really know. Like I'm trying to think about what does that look like in the classroom, and what could it look like? It kind of is like just a big question I have. When is the like invited relooking, and when do you want to do the relooking and relooking, even though they haven't done a lot today, and if that can be okay, and how do we make that okay, and how do we help that and support that?
Sorry, to that point of relooking and thinking about how I might use remediation in the classroom, this seems really pretty simple and straightforward, but to use a term that came up in the chat, affordances of media, academic prose by its nature is like really linear. So what I was trying to do when I was making my drawing was to free myself of that kind of constraint of being linear and put the images wherever I felt like I wanted to put them on the page. So asking kids to take a linear argument and just kind of put its pieces splatted out on a page drawn, I think gives us a chance to re-see what we're saying and maybe think about is the way we have it presented in text the best way.
So I'd like to just finish up by saying my classroom is actually an e-learning technologist in a in a dual sector university. So I deal with both higher ed academics, and I deal with people that are teaching at the vocational level, and they're teaching online. So what I think this looks like in the classroom or the virtual classrooms, I do a lot of teaching via online medium, is that I'd like to encourage the academics and the staff to include at least 3 medias in their message. So make sure there's an audio introduction or a voice board. Make sure there's a video of some description or pictures, and get them to think about different medias and using different medias to produce the same message. So I've really enjoyed it, and thank you.
Hey, it seems like we're starting to wrap up around here. We got a minute or two. Did we go around? Everyone get like a final word in? Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to say one thing. I'm not sure how I would use this. This is a brand new sort of thought for me, but I just finished reading Linda Berry's book, Syllabus. She's the cartoonist, and she teaches at University of Wisconsin. And I think that she's also dealing with the same issues that we're talking about. She's having people who are not art majors draw and then remix stories and build upon the imagery and the story. So if anybody's interested, that's a fun, easy read. It's called Syllabus by Linda Berry.
Oh, look, Rusty's taking notes. So it's just about to turn 8 o'clock. Anybody, any other resource suggestions before we start to close out?
Maybe not a resource in the traditional sense, but be on the lookout for the link to a talk that we're hosting tomorrow in our Summer Institute. We're having Paul Pryor from the Center for Writing Studies at Illinois come talk to our Summer Institute group, and we'll be live broadcasting that, and the talk will be available after as well. I'm sure it'll bring some new clarity to terminology that maybe we weren't able to do collectively.
Awesome. Well, thank you for this hour. We're going to continue making throughout the week, and remaking, remediating, and remixing, translating, transposing, improvising, juxtaposing. Any other words that I missed from? Blending. We're going to keep doing that throughout the week. We'll have a Twitter chat on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Is the central hours in there too, at 6. So thanks for coming out, and thanks for joining us, and wish you all a great safe night, and we'll keep the conversation going. Have a good one.
Thanks, Chris, for all your help, and thanks everybody for being on.
Yep.
Thanks.
Bye.